Good evening. Welcome to our school committee meeting this evening, Wednesday, November 20th, 2019. It is 7 o'clock. I'd like to call our meeting to order. Could we all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Tonight we have our student representative, Mr. Will Champagne. So, well, I think part of the deal, you have to give us an update on your sister, how she's doing when you come along, you know.
She's doing really well.
That's good.
Yeah, she's liking it.
That's great.
Yeah. Okay, so tomorrow is a half day and dismissals at 10:50, and there's parent-teacher conferences from 6:30 to 8. And this week has been Spirit Week for the Dude Be Nice climate program. Today was Dress for the Best Day, and tomorrow's Crazy Sock Day. The Turkey Teacher fundraiser is going on right now, and teachers who volunteer, or like, students can buy feathers for teachers who volunteer, and the teacher who gets the most feathers will wear the DHS turkey costume for a day. And right now, Mr. Dodonkor is winning by a large amount. And next week's half-day Wednesday, no school Thursday or Friday. And after Thanksgiving, winter sports begin. And December 12th is the DHS winter concert. That's what's going on in high school right now. That's a good idea.
You should wear it to a school committee meeting, but, you know. Is basketball tryouts already going on? There was a lot of activity down at the
Open gym.
Oh, it's just open gym. Oh, okay. Excellent.
Yeah, but it is just around the corner.
Yeah.
You're going to close the gym down next week, Monday, Tuesday, so it'll be refurbished, not refurbished, cleaned and
Yeah.
and so forth.
Great.
And the same thing at the middle school, so parents should be aware that their programs also begin Monday, whatever that day is, the 2nd. I think it is December 2nd.
Yep. Great.
And the turkey costume is always a priceless picture. Mr. Leonard wore it very well. Mrs. Mayo has worn it very well.
Oh,
Mayo. Excellent. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much, Will.
Will?
Welcome.
Great. Thanks, Will. Okay, with that, I'm going to open up to our public comment and communication section of our agenda. The school committee welcomes public comment on items that are within the scope of the school committee's responsibilities, but are not on our agenda. I do not see any members of the public here, so I'm going to move on to our next agenda item. Any old business anyone would like to discuss this evening? Any new business? Okay, with that, we'll move on to Mr. Main's superintendent's report.
Very good. If I could ask Mr. Romano to come on up, and he is going to be presenting the Abigail Adams, John and Abigail Adams Scholars from Douglas High School. We do have a nice little picture for those who are watching at home. Excellent. There they are.
Are you going to provide an explanation of what the...
Yes, I will. So the John and Abigail Adams Scholarship is awarded to the top 20, all right, it's very complicated, and I had practiced this and now I messed it up. So students take the 3 MCAS tests, ELA, Math, and Science. The John and Abigail Adams Scholarship is awarded to students who score at least one exceeding standard now. At the time that these guys took it, it would be advanced. On at least one exceeded and the other 2 at least proficient, and score with combined scores in the top 25% of their class. The John and Abigail Adams Scholarship is good for free tuition at any Massachusetts state college and university, so the UMass system, Worcester State, Fitchburg State, Framingham State, Salem State, all the states. And even if a student chooses not to go to a Massachusetts state school, it still looks great on their college applications and things like that.
You said free tuition?
Free tuition. Now, again, it doesn't include the fees,
Yeah.
All room and board.
room and board,
For 1
but
year?
it's still thousands, for all 4
Thousands
years.
of dollars.
It's thousands of dollars that students
It's a
can save.
wonderful thing.
Yep.
I've been
It is.
doing it.
Yep.
Great thing.
Anything that takes that bill down a little bit is a good thing.
And you know, my daughter didn't go to a public state university, but she did put it on her college applications and everything, and I think it probably certainly didn't hurt.
That's great.
That's our picture on the grand staircase. Do we have the individual student pictures? Just to kind of show you. We used to invite them in, but
Only a few of them could make it. It was
it just
awkward.
became kind of a thing. So that's them with their letters. We do copy the letters, keep a copy of them because they inevitably lose them. So we have Payne Barry, Lily Bolandrina, Emily Brooks, Angelina Carnero, Anna and Sarah Capillotti, Lauren D'Amico, Brian Doyle. By the way, incidentally, Lauren she's holding I think it's her kindergarten picture.
That's cool.
And the same hairdo and the same color shirt.
That's really
Very
cool.
precious. She is our Worcester County Superintendent's Association scholar. She opted not to use that picture in the program for the awards dinner.
Very good.
She used a senior photo instead.
Right.
Brian Doyle, Keegan Ferguson, Mary Foley, Leo Gualtieri. I've been pronouncing his name wrong for 2 years, but so has everybody else. So, Alyssa Gerton, Matt Lath, Nick Lemire, Keely Munjum, Gabby Annika Auer, Arani Safita, Jordan Staples, Brendan Timmerman, Kristen Walsick, Emma Wall, Joe Watkins, Harley Westgate, and Cody Winchell. Those are our Adams Scholars. And it's a great spectrum of kids that do all kinds of things around the school. There's athletes up there, there's AP students up there, there's
students.
musicians, there's all kinds of students up there. So it's a really great group.
That's great. Congratulations to all of them and to their parents.
Yes, definitely.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Don't go anywhere.
Oh, let me grab my notes.
Okay, gentlemen, ladies, if the rest of the audience could join us. You'll notice that your front to back works really well, which indicates that Ms. Tibbetts made them, not me. PowerPoints don't always print out.
No.
There's a certain button you're supposed to hit. I don't know what it is yet.
All right, so we are happy here to present our MCAS yearly report to you. The district accountability is determined by a number of targets such as achievement, growth, and high school completion. In previous years, the districts were placed into levels, so that has changed now.
Yeah.
Somebody have the,
There are no longer levels. There used to be a level 1, 2, 3, and 4. The levels have gone, which is one of the things that the new commissioner brought in a couple of years ago.
What level were we at?
We were at level 2.
Okay.
Right.
That's
So
what I thought.
what do they do if, like, you don't, what did they replace it with?
So
That's what
this is
I'm-
it.
Page 2.
yeah, it's coming.
On the second page of
Okay.
accountability, you'll
So
see
now
it.
they're placed into two categories, those that require assistance or intervention and those that do not. So this is a visual just showing you the different categories. So we fall in the not requiring assistance or intervention because it's based on points in the system and their formula with all of these targets. And so our cumulative target percentage was 56%, which meant we had substantial progress toward targets. So we're right in the middle of that left-hand side. So I thought that visual kind of explained it.
And if you were looking at this would be a level 2 again.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it kind
Right, I
of seems like it
know.
would correspond if you had one a little
This would
left
be a
there
level 2
and
again.
3 and
So
4 to the right.
the in the PowerPoint, as we're going through the PowerPoint, you'll see all and all of that stuff. So.
All right, and the next one, again, I thought it was a nice visual. It's really an average scaled score for every category from grades 3 to 8. So the first one is ELA, grades 3 to 8. How do we compare with the state and the district? And you can just see color-wise in every single graph, we're very back and forth, either a hair above or a hair below. So that's why I pulled that slide. And all of this is online, it's nothing that I created, it's all available. So it's 3 through 8, and then it's the science 5 to 8, then grade 10, they single it out.
But no science for grade 10?
No, that wasn't on there. I don't know why, if it's because of the test itself or,
The test, with the science test for, what were they using? Is that the student growth percentile or is it just overall score?
It's just a scaled.
Oh, yeah, I don't know why that would put it on.
Yeah, there was no science for grade 10 listed.
Students choose,
Well,
well, there's 4 different tests.
There's different tests in science, whereas there's
So
an
you'd
English
have
test,
to
there's a
break it
math
down.
test, but in science, you could
Gotcha.
take chemistry, you could take physics, you could take science tech, or you could take biology. So,
When we say it's online, it's at the DESE
Yes.
website? Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so after this, you're going to be hearing from each principal, and we break it down by grade and subject matter. So I'm going to pass that down.
So for grade 10 English, there was, we did outperform the state. If you take exceeding expectations and meeting expectations together, which is essentially you passed it, we do outperform the state, but not as much as we have in the past. It's a new test. It's not just the new format of having it on the computer. There really are some fundamental differences to the test. I'll speak to those a little bit different. Some key populations, our students with disabilities, there were no exceeding expectation scores among our students with disabilities, which is a concern. Maybe a larger pool, our economically disadvantaged students score well below the state if you take just a strictly pass or fail standard. And our female students far outperform the males on the ELA test. Going on to or any questions on ELA?
yeah, before you jump, can you can mention that it was a new test, it now was an online test, the structure of the test was a little bit different as well, and there was also the curveball that happened during the testing, which is that they threw one of the essays out for the first time ever. They threw one of their questions out.
There was an essay that asked students to put themselves in the role of a slave owner and write from a first-person perspective, and that was probably something that maybe a first-year English teacher would screw up and do, not something you expect the state to do.
And I'm sorry, Josh, the other thing is that if you look at all the other districts, because it's a new test, just like in when we've had other new tests, pretty much everybody's on that same plateau.
The
learning
goal
the
was
new
to make the
and so
test
forth.
more rigorous, and they succeeded at that, and so our scores kind of dropped comparable to others in ELA. Math, the test is definitely more difficult in math. Our scores did drop. Females slightly better than males, again. We're pretty much on, if you just pass-fail, we're essentially right at the state's average. Students with disability, again, 0 exceeding standards or exceeding expectation score. Our economically disadvantaged students, though, outperform the state average in math. So they fall below average in ELA, they perform above average in math. Grade 10 science, this is a combined, the Sci-Tech exam. Those students take the technology course, Sci-Technology course with John G&A, and then take the MCAS test in that subject. The rest of the kids, most of them are taking biology as freshmen, some are taking biology as sophomores. We do slightly better than the state. Males do outperform females in this test. Students with disabilities do actually very well on the bio test. They made big jumps on the bio test. Less so with the Sci-Tech. It's hard to look at the Sci-Tech numbers because you're really only talking 8 to 10 kids who take it every year. We have not traditionally performed well on that test. This year will be the last time that we issue that test anyway. The state's doing away with the science technology test. They're going to go from having 4 science tests down to just 2 choices, biology and the intro to physics test. And that is science.
Any questions for Mr. Romano?
Could I just ask how you feel about it? How do you feel about the scores and the results?
Well, I'm pretty disappointed in the math scores. I mean, I did expect that we would have a little bit of a dip. There's sort of a learning curve to the new format of the test. There's, I hate to say it, but kind of the teaching kids how to take the test. There is sort of a gap in knowing how the interface of actually using the computer test is. And it is asking for higher level skills. I think that math was less prepared for the new test than ELA was. This year we'll also have the science test will be online this year too, so we'll see how that rolls out. But I'm pretty confident that the student with disabilities numbers will continue to be good for the biology and moving forward. So.
Okay.
And I like the fact that Josh is bringing to the attention some of our subgroups, because that's one of the things that, as a collective group, we've been working a little bit more on, is trying to focus in on subgroups, economically disadvantaged students with disabilities. Again, those are not large numbers of students. There might be 10, 12.
You're only
maybe
talking
40.
8 kids, for example, with economically disadvantaged, but if we can get all of them to improve by 1 level, that's 8 out of 80. kids taking the test. It's actually pretty significant. So if we can find out what's causing that trend and find some ways to address it, eight kids moving up one level is actually a pretty significant gain for us. So when you're talking really kind of a small pool of kids.
I know you don't have this information with you, but I can relate to these because my children were in these grades, so I have a lot of knowledge about the kids in those grades. You don't happen to know like how they actually do like in the general classroom aside from the testing, like is that a higher grade?
So what I found, what I actually looked at was the student growth percentile for math and ELA, which is that's how much the student has improved from 8th grade to 10th grade, the 8th grade MCAS to the 10th grade MCAS. And now you are talking two teachers. There's a 9th grade teacher and a 10th grade teacher that impact that. So it's hard to just assign it to the one teacher. But then I compared that to their actual classroom scores. And what I found is that the math classroom grades, I think, are inflated based on where the students' growth was. So students getting very low growth percentile scores had 80s and 90s for report card grades. And so I've talked with the teachers about some assessment, their own practices. So maybe the worst one, which, it sounds good, but grading on a curve, for example. So if you grade on a curve and now the lowest score becomes, say, a 100. So if the lowest score was an 80, that's now a 100. Well, that means the kid who got a 50, well, he now has a 70. And so your assessments don't actually reflect student learning. The MCAS test does. So there's sort of a discrepancy there. That's the biggest disconnect that I found between sort of classroom practice and MCAS scores. Our classroom grades aren't necessarily predicting performance on the MCAS.
And I have to agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you saying that.
It's what we looked at, and I met with each math teacher and looked over their student growth percentiles and talked to them about their grading practices and how. I can look at it and I can see it, and it doesn't take a big analysis to kind of see that students with very low growth percentiles still doing very well in class. They probably didn't actually learn the content that they really needed to learn.
So, and one of the things that we do collectively now is you can go in and you get each and every student, how they performed on the test, and then how they performed on each and every standard and break it down so that you can now take that information and try to support the child going forward. It's actually much more beneficial at the lower grades because you're addressing it moving forward to when they get to 10th grade. So to your point, Julie, is that we also are able to break it down by each individual student and how they performed and what areas they performed well in, what areas they did not perform well in. Then look at it collectively. If 10 kids did not do well with the analyzing a document, well, we now know that that's something that collectively we all need to work on. And we do a lot of that work, and now and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but that's the kind of stuff that does go on.
Did any particular standards stand out from a math perspective that were concerned?
Yeah, there's always a couple, and what's frustrating though is it seems, because I track it from year to year, and it's almost
Changes.
never the same standard year after year. The test has actually shifted now, so the 10th grade test used to still ask a lot of 7th and 8th grade standards.
Yep.
And they've evolved it now. So what they found, the state found that a lot of kids were scoring quite well on the MCAS test across the state, and then getting to college and having to take high school level math courses.
Yep.
So they've raised the rigor basically of the test, and they were very successful at that. They took basically the 7th and 8th grade math standards are off of it, and they've kind of replaced it with more Algebra 2 trigonometry type questions. So the standards, we were doing poorly. A couple of years ago, we were doing poorly on the 7th and 8th grade standards because we weren't reviewing them enough, and kids are 4 years removed from it, and they've forgotten how to do that. So we fixed that. And then the next year, it was like multiplying polynomials or some, cylinders. That's the thing that we can never do, is measuring the volume of a cylinder.
All right, I can't measure well.
I can't do it either, so, but, it's different every year. It's a couple of standards every year, and it actually varies a little bit by teacher, too. So some teachers struggle more, or their students struggle more with a standard than others. And so.
Good. Thank you. Mr. Delaney?
Okay. I'm going to take a little different tack, if you don't mind.
Sure.
You have the numbers in front of you. I'm not going to read you the numbers.
Okay.
But what I am going to do is
I didn't read them.
you had your turn. You ceded your time, sir. Thank you.
Lieutenant Colonel.
Institutional change takes 3 years. That's a standard in the leadership classes that we took. So some numbers I want to present to you with the numbers that you're looking at in front of you is over the last 3 years, as you'll see again, as Mr. Romano talked about, we are strong in ELA, but at Douglas Middle School over the last 3 years, we've had double-digit growth in all areas that we were really focusing on. To echo what Mr. Romano says, to talk about students of socioeconomic disadvantage, economic disadvantaged students, students with special needs, we follow that same trend. And as Mr. Manns talked about, we have a plan in place. We've already implemented those things. But I am happy to say that over the last 3 years in the ELA, that we have improved our exceeding scores by 11.6%. We've improved our meeting scores by 12.3%. We have reduced our partially meeting scores by 21%, and we've held just about the same with the not meeting.
That's across all grades?
That's an average for the school, all grades,
Yeah.
right? So again, I could just
Yeah.
rattle off numbers to you. Grade 6 exceeding was 22% above state average. I'm sorry, improvement. I'm sorry, it was above state average. So they're 8%, sixth grade, 8% above meeting, 23% below partially meeting. So again, I did an aggregate of, and again, if we have a slide later on of our ranking, you'll see that the grade 6 is all the way at the top in the valley. And again, that's in math, I can't claim the same strength, but what I do have is buy-in from the staff and the vertical team that will look at what worked over the last 3 years and changing how we attacked. And I will, again, throw myself in the mercy of the court here. We do not teach to the test. That's a standing order in Douglas Middle School to my teachers. Forget the test. I tell the kids, forget the test. We're learning to be great learners. Great reading is great reading. Great writing is great writing. And we want to have a love of learning and engagement. That's what we're trying to do at Douglas Middle School. I believe the double-digit growth, double-digit reduction in the areas we want to reduce is indicative of that plan, that we're not just going at a standard and doing MCAS questions every day in class. We're looking at the education process holistically in the classroom, and in the ELA, it's netted results, and now we're going to apply the same logic around math as well, where we see areas of weakness. And again, I can talk about that a little later when we talk about our action plan, but that's a little bit where we are there. So I just kind of did an aggregate for you to focus on the positive, and then, math, it's not, we're kind of stagnant, right? The good news is we're not dropping, right? We're kind of hanging right in the middle. So that's the kind of aggregate report there, and if you need more detail, I'll be happy to provide it. We got lots and lots and lots of data. So.
All right, I got a question.
Sure.
On the math for this grade 8, do you have information as far as, I know that they do an honors class, right, in grade 8?
Yes, yep.
So is there a way to tell if those kids fell in that exceeding? Because wouldn't they kind of have an advantage?
We are not, Mr. Romano talked about tracking our students. We are not pleased with if you look at the number of students that we have in the exceeding category in ELA, those same students aren't translating in math, where we have a much lower representation in exceeding, and we want to know why. Some of the things you've heard me talk about with the NWEA benchmarks, they can help track us, they can help tell us who's going to be tracking for that exceeding score in MCAS. So the test we're taking is normed against the Massachusetts state standards. I'm not pleased to report, but again, it's still something for us to focus on, that our first benchmark test, we didn't have any students in the 8th grade right now. We took our benchmark test in the first week of September. None of them were tracking to make exceeding in math, and that's even in the honors. Our highest score just hit the top of meeting expectation, right? So that's September.
September.
We're still in November.
Right.
right? And that we have another benchmark coming up in December, and we'll have a much better idea 4 months before we actually have to take the MCAS where we are, know where our weaknesses are. But one of the things that both 8th grade and 7th grade are doing is that they're using a platform that we have, an online platform called IXL, that is drilling standards, skills, and content. We used the benchmark data, and we were focusing on areas of weakness with each student, as Mr. Romano talked about, looking at the kids on that bubble and below the level and filling in those gaps. So that's the first step that we're taking to address where we're weak, and I'm not asking for double-digit growth from my teachers. I'm asking for growth. Really my goal is 5 to 8%. And we're taking a very data-driven approach with the benchmark data and the weekly IXLs with the regular assessment that we're doing that's standards-based in a classroom. So we've got 3 areas that we're trying to track. We're 2.5 months into the school year, and we'll be looking at this very closely to try to get the math numbers where the intelligence and cognitive skills of our students clearly are, as indicated by the ELA numbers.
All right, so I don't want to mean to.
Did that
take
answer your
off-
question,
Yeah,
or-
no, it does. But here's another follow-up question. So years ago, they used to have like 2 math classes.
Yeah.
And I know like when you started, you really focused on the reading part. And so I could see that probably reflects this because the ELA seems to be a lot higher than the math. Do they still do the 2 math classes? They don't do 2 math classes,
They don't.
right?
They don't. Again, we were, we as I said, there hasn't been a dip in the 3-year scores from when we got rid of the 2 math classes. So we're still kind of hanging there. And we replaced 2 math classes with, we've got chorus in school now, band in school now, we've got a STEM class in school. You ask a kid, what would you rather do, chorus, band, or STEM, or another math class? So I didn't think the answer is another math class. I think it's more data-driven focus around our delivery. I do not believe it is an area of, it's a concern of instruction. We've got the right people. We just have to tailor our, what we're focusing on. And there are weaknesses that students are coming into the middle school with. And if you look at the data in 6th grade, where they are from 5th grade, 6th grade math is doing short of miracles to bring the kids up from where we're getting them. And then they're maintaining a status quo. We want to see that trend line tilt in the right direction. We the good news is we're not plummeting. We come up and then we hold it there.
So as somebody who's not an educator, like you mentioned, we have great teachers. In my experience, we have great teachers. What are some other and like changing the test, I can see how that can skew scores. But just looking at the math percentages, like across the board, all 3 schools, they're lower than the ELA. So could you just it doesn't have to be the answer. Obviously, if you knew the answer, we would be able to be like, boop, and now we have great math scores. But could you talk about some potential factors that?
You want me to talk about potential factors? I'm going to let Mr. Bell talk about potential factors.
Mr. Bell can talk about potential factors.
So I think one of the things we're noticing at the elementary school, which then is impacting what's happening in the middle school and the high school, is our kids are great at, they know their facts. They can do the basic computation. It's when they have to actually take it deeper and apply those skills to new situations. That's where our kids are struggling. So I think a lot of that comes from our instructional design. It's been very textbook oriented, where we're doing worksheets and we're trying to move away from that. We still need to do the rote memorization, the practice, but we don't need to drill it so much that we're killing it and then kids hate math. We need to really get kids excited about math and help them develop that problem-solving, critical thinking, those skills that then when they get a new situation on the MCAS test they haven't seen before, they can use what they know and actually apply it to that situation. And so that's my job and Cindy's job at the younger grades to get that number sense developed and that ability to really think and critically think about a problem and break it down and figure out where to go with it. And then I think when they get to the middle school and the high school, we're going to be more successful with getting them to be able to do those higher complex math skills that they have to be able to do there. Does that kind of answer
No,
that
it
question?
definitely does. I think,
So,
I think
it's
it's
a-
just
a
easy
K
for
through
people
12
to look at
approach,
numbers
but-
and be like, they need new math teachers. But I mean, that's not what we're hearing. So I think it's helpful just to hear. So what are other areas that can be tweaked that could benefit?
Yep.
It's also important to remember that the fifth grade MCAS is a math test, is a one-day snapshot
Right.
of where
Right.
they are
Yeah.
in the course of the fifth grade.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be the do-all, be-all. They do other activities that can also assess the student's growth and so forth.
Right.
So, they looked at, and we'll have to talk about this in the budget, but you went to ST Math, which is another program that might be something that might be complementary, that will give them another opportunity to be exposed to some math in a different way.
Yep.
But address that.
Yeah.
It's a one-day snapshot, but it's also an opportunity for us to see how we do compared to others, because one day, that's how it's gonna be when they apply to colleges and jobs, you know?
Right.
So I think it's,
Yep.
I don't like testing, but
Right.
that's the only reason why I think it's a
But
good thing.
well, I shouldn't say that, at the high school, they have the SAT, PSATs, but in each of the other buildings, they also have other assessments that they're using as well, which gives us more data, which is, I think, much more beneficial than just that one test. For years, it was just this one test, this was the be-all to end-all. And now, with NWEA and with Excel and with the other things that we've got going on, we're now able to gather more data, which is
Yeah.
helpful. The one thing about data that I'll tell you is that the packet that's on my desk is probably this high right now. The fact of the matter is that data is only useful if you're able to effectively disseminate it, analyze it, review it, and have it drive the changes that you're going to make, which is difficult in the fact that teachers are teaching all day long, and it's hard to get that work done. But we're going to go to grade 5 now.
All right, so I'm going to kind of do the elementary all together with the grades, but the specific data for each grade's there. Obviously, ELA, our scores are stronger. We were either similar to the state or exceeding the state. Fifth grade was our best scores. They were the second in the valley, that's awesome, better than they've been in the past. For math, it's still a struggle. I will say that this year's scores were an improvement from the previous year's score. It's a slight improvement, but it's an improvement still. Our fifth grade scores were our weakest ones. They were below the 50th percentile in the valley, so I think we were 7th out of the 13 schools or 12 schools that are there. But it's an area that we need to keep working on. Overall with math, kind of like what I was saying, we do great on the basic facts, basic skills. When it's more the application, the open-ended response, those types of questions, that's where our students tend to struggle more. So that's what we've been working on as a staff. Our science standards were great this year. They were third in the valley and significantly better than the state average, which is exciting. We have one fifth grade teacher in particular is very passionate about science and that has done a great job of preparing our fifth graders for that test and just getting kids excited about science instruction. So, we still have some work to do. I will say last year was a very tumultuous year at the elementary school with a new principal coming in with some new ideas and
Kansas, no less.
bringing those Kansas ideas and some of it, just getting to know the staff. Kind of like Brian said, it takes 3 years to kind of make that institutional change. Last year I'm happy to see where our scores are at. We didn't dip at all. We grew. We had some slight gains, but I think this year has been just because we did a lot of changes last year with our special education model and some of our instructional models, and it was a lot of getting used to some new things. This year, people are much more confident with the things that we're doing, and I can't wait to kind of see where we end up when we take our test this year.
Was
You
last
raise
year,
a really interesting point. That it'll be interesting to see how the new model plays out
Yep. And I will say,
for next year when you're sitting here looking at
our
this.
special education scores are not where they need to be yet, similar to what the other schools are reporting also. Lots of students in the not meeting or the partially meeting. We need to get more of those students making the progress they need to make and getting to that meets expectations. We don't have anybody even close to the exceeds expectations. I also think that our special ed program has done a great job historically of meeting the social emotional needs of our kids, but sometimes those academic needs come second to those social emotional needs, which is understandable. We need to keep finding ways to get those academics in even when those students are needing having those other needs that they have. So that's where I think our new model has helped some of that, because students are able to be in their classrooms more, they're able to get more support when they need it. And so I'm kind of curious to see where our scores end up this year, but it is an area we need to keep an eye on too.
I wanted to just add something that Mr. Bell said with our special education population, that we do spend a lot of time, a lot of these kids, they don't even want to be at school. They hate school. School's not a comfortable place for them. So to get them to like coming to school is their first goal. They're resistant to school. Then once we have them, then we try to motivate them, and it's a brilliant part of the job. But it is, we do a phenomenal job in keeping these kids close and in our embrace, and doing something that they're not real hip on, but they're still doing it with fidelity on a daily basis, and we appreciate that.
I was just trying to find a particular quote.
Was last year the second year of the Title I math? Title I math still
Yes, 2
relatively new,
complete
right?
years, this is their 3rd year.
Yeah, so now we're starting the 3rd right now, right? Okay.
Yep. I'm trying to remember the exact quote that's up in the office about anxiety. It's not about ability, anxiety is about interference. And so if a child is dealing with anxiety and trauma, it isn't about their ability, it's the interference in them being able to utilize their ability because they're dealing with anxiety and trauma, which goes to the point that we're talking about the social emotional piece. It definitely does interrupt continuity in student success, as you would imagine. All right. Is there any, you have any?
All I got for
Okay.
elementary. Any questions?
Thank you.
All right. I think it becomes district next, right? Okay, so, one of the things that we've been committing to over the 3 years that I've been sitting in this chair is really looking at data and sharing it, and really looking at it and trying to understand, again, you gotta be diligent in collecting your data. You need to be diligent in reviewing your data. You got to be diligent in analyzing the data. You got to be diligent in disseminating the data. And then you got to be really diligent in trying to manage all that data and move it into review, revision, revisement, all geared towards one thing, which is improving student learning. I think that collectively as a group, we do a really good job with data. We do share it, and again, the most difficult part about data and having it drive change is finding time to really sit, analyze, talk collegially, and talk about how you're going to make changes. And one of the things that we're doing this year is we're doing 3 vertical team meetings and so forth. I'm hoping that is going to spur some of the discussions that haven't been taking place and help use the data to drive change. Using the data during department meetings, using the data during common planning time, using the data to have team meetings and so forth. All of that is critical to driving change and driving improvement. So that's one of the pieces where we're spending a lot of time and a lot of energy is on data. And then, as Cindy has up there, the vertical team. So we're going to be doing 3 this year. First one has already taken place. One of the things that's new about this year is that the administrative team is going out and sitting in on the meetings and being part of the meetings. And that, I think, is helpful as well as to model investment, which is what we're looking for from the teachers. So they're modeling that. Our upcoming PD day in January, we talked about it today at the admin meeting. What the DTA is looking for is for an opportunity for horizontal meetings, which are really hard to do because grade 1 doesn't always have a chance to sit and talk with grade 2. Kindergarten doesn't have a chance to talk to grade 1. So during the professional development day, we're going to dedicate at least 3 hours to afford that type of conversation. So pre-K with K, K with 1, K with pre-K, and so forth, so that they can sit and really talk a little bit about what they do, how they do it, when do you do it, and hopefully that will drive change as well. One thing that we've talked about here on a couple of occasions, A lot of schools use additional professional development day for curriculum development and for this type of work, the data analysis and so forth. For example, there are schools that have a 186-day schedule. Well, that means that they've got 5 days that they're dedicating their time to looking at, and you can get much more done if you can dedicate more time. The downside, the difficult part for that is you can't ask somebody to work 5 more days and not look to compensate them for 5 more days. But that is something that I think for the last 10 years we've talked about. How do we get additional professional development days? And that was kind of the point I was trying to drive at. It's hard during the school year, during the school day, to do that type of work. It's much easier if you're able to spend an entire day where, grade 1 and in kindergarten are actually sitting and really looking and studying and looking at the data, but also looking at curriculum and so forth. So to me, that's one of the things that I know that everybody would like to see happen is to have a few more days that we could really dedicate towards it. All right, and I think I'm picking up the next piece because Mrs. Urquhart couldn't be here tonight, so I will talk a little bit about special education plan. They have school-based action plans that are in place. They look for strategic and timely interventions. John mentioned it. They do a great job of really looking at and developing intervention strategies for kids that are struggling. As we know, the IEP process supports appropriate accommodations, modifications. They are not necessarily 100% geared towards performing better on MCAS. They are more geared towards performing better on a day-to-day basis within their academic classrooms. But that does support them when they take their MCAS tests. And then for ELA, Neely stressed the fact that they look at when they have opportunity to work one-on-one with the students or in small groups, they're looking to develop higher level skills. They're looking at the students in ELA being able to draw conclusions, make inferences, working on their comprehension skills. They're being able to read questions carefully, breaking questions down into small pieces and answering one part of the question, then moving on to the next part of the question. Chunking is a word that they use an awful lot. And then brainstorming activities. In advance of an actual instructional content is brainstorming. What do you think the story is going to be about? And so forth. So they start thinking about the story itself. And then in math, they do run practice MCAS tests. I know that the high school, they do have practice MCAS questions. And they do have, one of the things that's important is working with the special education teachers and the classroom teacher to make sure that the reference sheets that they qualify for are good reference sheets. And they have to be approved by the state as well. A lot of guided practice in math, trying to expose kids to more complex problems. Again, the idea of chunking a complex problem down into small pieces, and then asking them to also sometimes use visual representations as opposed to just trying to answer a question, trying to be able to make a drawing or some sort of a depiction of what the math question is asking. So those are the things that special education is doing specifically in those categories. I think that was my piece, and I think it's your piece. Thank you.
Oh, it's my piece. All right, so some of the stuff that we've been doing, all the departments did analysis of the new test. So we tried to get ahead of this last year. We still got kind of blindsided with some of the content, the level of rigor with the math test, and kind of the nuances of the ELA test. The ELA test has a lot more higher order thinking skills, like comparing multiple passages instead of like the old test would have a reading and then you have some questions. And then you have a different reading and you have a couple questions. This one, they give you a couple of readings and you have to answer questions that ask you to compare or analyze the point of view or some other sort of higher order thinking type thing. As the teacher in me thinks that's great, the principal in me worries about that because it's a lot harder. But it probably is a better test. There's also 3 styles of writing in the new ELA test. There's compare, contrast, narrative essay, and step procedure versus the old style that was really just asking you to maybe do one. Compare, contrast, it was the big one. The math test just plain more rigorous, like I said. No 7th and 8th grade stuff, a lot more Algebra 2 trig stuff, which most of our students don't get to until junior year, maybe senior year. So we've been identifying those writing tasks and finding ways to add writing to non-ELA classes. So compare, contrast, for example, lends itself pretty well to history. Step procedure, which is this is how you do a process. That's not actually what the MCAS calls it, but that's what I called it when I was teaching. I can't remember what the MCAS calls it. It lends itself very well to science. So that they've been doing that with their labs and things like that. The state also, for the first time in a very long time, released students' actual open response answers. So I got a massive PDF that had every kid, all 3 of their essays for every student. And so the ELA department and I, we went through them and we looked at, this student got 8 out of 8 points. What did they do in this to get this 8 out of 8 points? It was enlightening. We're still kind of trying to figure out what the magic Kool-Aid is to get the 8 out of 8 because it's a little inconsistent to us, but they also were machine scored. And machine scored essays don't always translate into human understanding of how that score came about. We're, like we've always done, identify our low-performing standards and develop new lessons, but I'm also working on getting them to do benchmark assessments, particularly in math, sort of similar to the WEA that the middle school's been doing. What they're doing is they're looking at benchmarks and saying, this student is on track based on how they're performing on this. And I think that kind of goes back to what you had asked Ms. Mulder about the kind of the grades in math maybe not reflecting student performance. But if we had more of a formal benchmark system where we're saying by this point the student needs to be able to do these skills, I think that will benefit students, or at least give us a chance to have a heads up when a student's not doing well. And then the last one really is those gaming the test, developing the test prep strategies, how to compare passages. There's sort of a skill involved in that. There's the actual intellectual skill of comparing 2 passages. There's also you can make the computer go back to the first passage and look at it again, that we found many students didn't do. And then I've been digging into the subgroup performance. For the economically disadvantaged students, I'm kind of trying to turn this to my student support team, because the research I did, I could only really find interventions and programs that schools have used for really early intervention, like preschool, and then first-generation college, and then urban poverty, which is, what they're talking about are emergency food and emergency housing plans. And, we already kind of work resources for that when that comes up. So I'm kind of asking my student support team to help out with that. For the students with disabilities, we need to look at our low-performing standards and then figure out what interventions we do. And we have the time in academic support. We just need to figure out what it is that we need to do to support those students. But I think we also need to look at our math pathway and our math curriculum, because now I can pull out and I can look at last year's geometry concepts class, and I can look at those students' performance, and I can see every single one of them got question 28 wrong. Question 28 was a trigonometry question. They had no chance. They do, the 1 in 4 random guess chance that of just filling in circles. So I think we need to kind of look at that lowest track, lowest level track, we'll call it what it is. And does it still prep our kids enough for a more rigorous MCAS test, or do they need some of these skills earlier? And how do we figure out how to do that? Because we have students who struggle in math just doing that track that we have right now. And then we have expanded our co-teaching in math and ELA, and that's especially at the grade 9 and 10 level. And I would say, to look at the grade 9 and 10 pairings versus the grade 11, 12 pairings, there's been a lot more cohesion and a lot more success in the collaborative teaching of the grade 9 and 10 pairs, which, it's a lot of credit to both teachers in those relationships, because it is asking people to do something well outside of their comfort zone. For the special ed teacher to go into the classroom, for the subject teacher to kind of give up some of their role. And then for the females outperforming males in math and ELA, I have a school culture task force basically that's going to look at that, among other things. But we're going to try to figure out what can we do in our culture to make it so that males feel that it's more acceptable for them to achieve.
Do you think that's isolated to the high school, or is that a district-wide?
What's your take on the data? I think you kind of found some of the parallels, right?
Yes, absolutely. Again, if you just saw the Adams scholar, there's twice as many females as there were males.
Right.
And
I've noticed it definitely, in our graduating classes over the last couple of years. I've been involved.
The class officers are mostly female. The top athletes are mostly female. So
my data in, particularly in math, top 61%, again, double-digit differences, uncomfortable double-digit differences of how many females were representing that upper group than males. And if you were to change the title of what those numbers represent, and you were to assign other demographic
Yeah.
ideals, you'd be in a lot of trouble,
Yeah.
right? But we go, it's boys and girls in middle school, and they're just kind of, But if, I look at it much more seriously than that, and I do look at it as an equity issue. What do the numbers tell us?
Yeah.
Why is there such a gap? Let's look in the mirror. People don't like what they see. It's an uncomfortable discussion. But look at the numbers and why. We can do task force, right? Or we can, again, what are the expectations, what we talk to kids, it's all micro things, but they add up. The numbers are there. Our boys are behind. And, we need to focus on that.
And
There was an interesting piece of data that came out that Josh and I were talking about in the summertime, is that in our SAT scores, the boys actually outperform the girls.
Interesting.
Not by a lot.
Not by a lot, and that is a selected population, but, what I'm trying to do with my student advisory council, which is kids, is I pose to them the question, why don't boys participate in student government? Why don't our male students take honors and AP courses? And it started with boys are lazy, boys are doing work avoidance, but it also, but there are females that are the same way too. But there is a perception that if you do well at school, that it's not cool to do well at school among the guys, and so.
Is there any research at the state level or national level around this?
So there is some that is a common, I don't know, it's not quite toxic masculinity, but it's sort of a cult of masculinity that and then it perpetuates itself. So it does happen. One of the first step that the kids and I have talked about doing is the MIA actually gives an award for academic performance for teams. It's based on the average GPA of the members of the team. So if all the boys on the soccer team score above a 3.5 combined GPA, then the team gets an award. And it can't hurt. So I'm going to ask Mary Sokol to pursue that program. I had some success with it at Murdoch, so I think it might be worth trying that. Maybe as a team, if they can be encouraged to do better, that might help.
And you usually hear like the girls when they'll do sports and they have to wait for the bus or whatever. Like they're all doing their homework, where the boys,
The boys are playing
Whatever.
the bouncy ball.
yeah.
Yeah.
I see it in my house.
absolutely
On the
right.
computer or something like that.
Or I'll go home and play video
Can
games.
I ask about the national trends? And I don't know if I'm going to get myself in trouble here, but I just, I have a 12-year-old, almost 13-year-old daughter, so I've been paying attention over the last 13 years around this. Lots of bring your daughter to work, girls in, programs.
Girls in the sciences and things like that.
Yeah,
and
lots of,
Boys are getting left
programs,
behind.
specifically around getting girls involved with certain initiatives. And are we, has the country kind of left the boys behind a bit?
Pendulum is shifting significantly, and in all the work I've been doing with STEM, and particularly with outside agencies and private industry, they always start with the women in STEM first. And I'm the one to shout, I'm like, please include the boys. There's been 3 different opportunities that were presented to us as STEM for girls. We have 50% of our population is male, and they need this too. And I appreciate what we're trying to do. So when we go to WPI, where we're doing stuff for Project Lead the Way, the entirety of the staff that's presenting to us is all female. And then even
it's true.
WPI's
about
president,
that.
the first president of 16 presidents, the first female. But all I see, and then my STEM teacher's female, and the entire math, science department, and they're all female. And anytime we go to these off-site professional development, the entirety of the staff there is female. And so there's a huge pendulum shift. And then I sound like a nut job, and I start saying I think we're seeing 4 years of boys playing in a basement in Fortnite. I swear to God, these guys have locked themselves away.
That could be too, yeah.
And,
for sure.
and they've
Yeah, so that's my point, is I'm glad to see us looking at our own culture for it, but we might be fighting against some larger cultural
No, I think we are. We
currents
definitely
there,
are. So we need to figure out
so-
what we can do to outweigh that culture. I
So-
do think your daughter's probably the one who's going to be supporting you in your old age, though. That's my
It could
plan.
be, yeah.
That's my plan. My daughter's way smarter. She's gonna.
Yeah.
The focus, just to emphasize the feminist movement, the focus on women was well needed.
Oh, yeah, and that's why I was saying I was going to be in trouble, because I don't want it to be taken that way.
It was a slight, so.
Yeah,
Been
but again,
very
like you
successful
said,
at it,
Right.
yeah.
I think pendulum swing is probably a good way to.
But it's a balance, because
but
we
boys
want to see
notice
the
it,
boys,
too.
we
Yeah.
want to see the boys participate more in student government. We want to see the boys doing better, but
Yeah.
we don't want to see the girls drop off either. So.
It's finding
Yeah.
that sort of way to internalize the reward for them of doing that, seeing the value of it.
Can I make one comment on that? Doesn't it? So, as you know, I was working on my pilot's license, and I won't name the company, but an international aviation company was doing a huge aviation training, and I won't even say where. So anyway, he wanted my take on a particular thing, gearing towards, getting more women pilots, getting more women pilots, getting more women pilots. So I got to be honest with you, from my perspective, I got a little aggravated. I kind of shot back a text and said, women have been flying for almost 100 years. So we don't really need, in other words, I wanted to fly. I got into it. I did the work. Anybody else who wants to fly can do the same thing.
Yeah.
It's just a point. I know things can be
True.
seen different ways, but it's like this big concentration. And I kind of thought the same thing. And when I would go down to the airport, the biggest thing for me was I want to be just seen as a pilot. I'm not a woman pilot. I am just a pilot like everybody else. In fact, I can't stand the emphasis on my being a woman pilot, to be honest with you. Yeah, so that's just my take on it.
Point well taken. Thank you.
The only opposite to that would be like, we still say male nurse. If you have a nurse. Maybe the only. All right, so I didn't put these in here to be a wise guy. I swear to God. In fact, I even said to Ms. Sosha, take that out if it sounds too demanding. But these are things that these are things that would be great to have, and a lot of them are things that other schools have. And the first two kind of speak to what Mr. Maines was saying earlier about extra PD. The most impactful thing that we can do to improve learning is to improve our classroom instruction. It's also the hardest thing to do. It requires time. So, you need to figure out what are you going to focus on. Don't focus on too many things because they'll mess it up. Once you teach it, how are you making sure that they're doing it well or doing it at all? Because when they close the classroom doors, they can just ignore doing it. But it is the single most important, or the single biggest impactful thing we can do is just improve instruction. But it takes time and it takes money. I'd like to see some different expectations for the role of department chairs as supervisors of their teachers, of helping to improve instruction. I could use an additional ELA teacher. Just saying.
Beyond
Support
the
for
one we
those.
approved this year, or are you talking about the one we approved this year? Just filling that.
More.
Okay.
Always more. Additional paraprofessionals to support those Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. I need somebody to do those. Once I identify what the kids need, I need somebody to work with them. Late bus would be awesome. And math coach, interventionist to assist in teaching staff and students. The late bus issue is, I said that sort of facetiously, but it is sort of a significant issue. Like a lot of our students, including economically disadvantaged ones, they don't have a transportation home. So if they stay after school, they're walking. And so, that not having transportation is a barrier to their success.
I love that idea. I'm so glad you brought that up, because BVT has that, and that is such an advantage.
Yep. It really is, not not beyond academics, but just to the social aspects of the school. As we're trying to do more and more
Clubs,
things to
Clubs,
keep kids.
clubs.
Right.
All kinds of things.
So many of our positive things for kids to do in their lives can be around here. I watched a group of kids playing Dungeons and Dragons after school today with Mr. Nash, and it's a group of kids that aren't normally the type to hang out at school, but we're missing out on kids who just can't get a ride home because of that late bus thing. So
That's sad.
So it's a wish list, but it's.
I'm going to jump in one more time. Again, it's not necessarily for you, Jess. I think it's more district-wide, but I think it goes to some culture as well. I think we've done a lot of work on social emotional learning over the last several years with our professional development days, and it feels like that's kind of ingrained in our culture now. Is there an opportunity to kind of step away from some of those things in the future from a professional development perspective, now that ball is kind of rolling a little bit, and focus on more some of these academic things that maybe we don't have time to get to? Just a thought, and maybe you guys have already thought about that and said, no, we need to kind of continue
So
the
that's why
path, or is there,
But there's
opportunities there?
another piece that comes with that, and part of it is that we have an obligation as a district to provide opportunities for our faculty to earn PDs in specific areas that they need to earn PDs in order to recertify. So, for example, special education, everybody needs to earn 15 PDPs over 5 years in order to recertify. So short of taking a course, by providing, for example, Mr. Nutley was here from and he did a presentation that was 3 hours that they were able to pick up for their PDP. So it is kind of, I hear what you're saying, I don't disagree with you, but for us not to offer them something during the course of the year for them to get PDPs in, say, special education, we would, or SEI was the other thing years ago that we had to provide them opportunities. We would be doing a disservice to the teaching faculty as well. So, but I don't disagree. If we could get a couple additional days would be a godsend.
Can they do those things like on their off time, like when they're not in teaching?
Well, when they
in the summer and stuff?
State passed the new, when the state passed the SEI and when it passed the new requirement for certification in special education, the mandate was that the opportunities would be provided through professional development within the school districts.
And if I can jump in,
That's right, EL, yeah, I'm sorry, yeah.
we have 2 PD days a year. We have to cover safety planning, we have to cover social emotional
No,
things,
I
special
understood.
ed.
That's why I was wondering, just a
Academic.
chance to kind
And
of
so,
pull back
I
from
mean,
some of those things that we've been doing in order to,
And it's that constant, like, what's the biggest priority? And there's 1,000 priorities, and really 2 days is not a lot of time. And I don't know, I mean, we all feel it. We need more time to get with our staff and work with them if we want to make some of these improvements. But
As we get into the negotiations, it's a good chance to address that. And I don't think that the faculty themselves would disagree that they would benefit from a couple additional
I think our
days.
staff want to learn. I mean, but it's trying to find the time. And are we putting subs in classrooms to work with our kids so we can do? And that's not great either. It's so.
Full days, yeah.
Yeah, regular.
Back in the day,
Yes.
I'm gonna age myself here, we had Wednesdays once a month, a half day. And then we shifted away from that because parents said, we don't have daycare, we don't have anyone to take care of the kids, and so on.
It's also time on learning that you have to be careful
That
as well. You really have to keep a close eye on time on learning to make sure that you're meeting the state mandates of 900 or 980, is it 990 at the high school level, whatever.
But there are districts that still do the
Yeah.
half-days.
All right, well,
sorry, yeah, Mr. Delaney.
Mr. Delaney,
I just have a one slide. I already summarized it basically, but we are going to continue to build on the success that we've grown over the last 3 years. It's working. We're going to continue to refine that. And we've seen the big change last year was the addition of more math, that 35-minute block every day, either more math where they're drilling their math concepts or 35-minute silent reading that every kid in the school is doing every other day. They love it. You know, if there's a day that they miss it, the kids get a little punchy, that they feel like they're falling behind and they want to pick up that book. So we're going to continue to do what's working. As I indicated before, daily, weekly, monthly check-ins using our data from 3 different data sets to see where our kids are. Again, we're 2.5 months into it, and you know we are. I have put a gold doubloon on the mast for a number of a number of teachers who were looking in their evaluations to meet an exceeding goal, and I said, we do these things, we set this goal, we do these things, I'll have no problem, and you show success, you show that we're faithful to it, and it netted results as we think it will, or even we will die trying, I will give you that rating, no problem at all. So we're all committed, right? And they came to me with this idea too. I'm the one who went out and got the stuff, but they figured out how to use it best, and that's working well. And then again, we've made it as a district, we made a commitment to STEM, and I believe that the integration of science, technology, engineering, and math across all grades into each subject matter area will pay huge dividends. And so again, we're focusing on this, and then how to integrate this into the classroom. So there's again a more, as I said earlier, a holistic approach, and the students are making connections, and we can really talk about what 21st century learning looks like across multiple disciplines. So that's where we're going to go with that.
thank you, sir.
All right, at the elementary school, we talked about how we've made some slight gains in math, but we have a lot more that we need to do, specifically with that application of the concepts. Our October professional development focused on providing real-world, hands-on learning experiences for kids. Like Brian said, integrating subjects together so that writing and reading are part of math and science and social studies, so that it makes the learning more meaningful. It gives them, talking about application, that's a great way to apply concepts when they're having to apply it to different subjects in different areas. And so we've then done some continued follow-up at our December faculty meeting. We're going to be coming back and sharing some of the things we've been trying over the last couple months so teachers can learn from each other. We have teachers doing great things in their classrooms, but they never get to see what other teachers are doing. And so we're going to spend some time really allowing teachers to share with each other and learn from each other. And then also during our common planning times, just having discussions about those, we talked about doing all this stuff. What are we doing to actually meet those goals? How are we taking our learning deeper? When I'm in the classrooms, I see worksheets and things like that, and I'll ask, instead of doing that worksheet, what could we have done that would have accomplished the same task, that would have engaged students more, and allowed them to get a deeper understanding of the concept? And so we've been having those discussions during our common planning times. Last year, we spent a lot of time with implementing small groups and in a new special education model. This year, we're continuing to improve in that. I had a discussion today with one of my teams about their small group model isn't quite working the way they want it to yet, so what tweaks and changes can we make to make it more effective? But we're continuing to fine-tune things to make those work as well as they can. We've had a renewed commitment this year to vertical teams in common planning time. Like we talked about, the vertical teams, I think, are essential for Cindy's building, the first grade teachers to work with my second grade teachers, for my fifth grade teachers to work with Brian's sixth grade teachers, and even within our buildings for those conversations to happen about, where are your kids at when they get to you? What do we need them to be better at, and how can we address those needs so that we have alignment K through 12 to really have a plan for where we want our kids to go. And then I'm most excited about, I think this year, the exploration of Project Lead the Way at the elementary level and along with middle school and high school. And then ST Math is another component that we can use to take a different look at how we do our math instruction. So Cindy and I have been working on that. And so we're still in the early processes of those, so some grants with it. Overall, they're pretty, Project Lead the Way is free, and ST Math, there's a small fee for it that we would replace with some other things. But I think there's some exciting opportunities to kind of meet the need that we're seeing with taking math and learning deeper and science and everything else. But specifically with math, I think it's going to really help us address the needs that we're seeing within our school. So.
Thank you.
All right, and even though we don't have MCAS, we still do a lot with reading
All
and
starts
math.
with you.
I know, right? We still have assessments. We use the Ames web testing that is done 3 times a year, so we can still analyze that. It's a new test this year, so we're struggling a little bit with, kind of figuring it all out, but we'll get there. We did a great math workshop last year in October, and so this year we hit the reading, and we had someone from the Hill from Literacy, which is out in Newton, I believe, and the teachers absolutely loved it. They were using strategies, little tiny hints the next day of class. You could walk around and they were all using that strategy that they learned. So, well worth it. It was a half a day. It was perfect. We are piloting a new Reading Wonders program this year in grade 1, the 2020 version, which has some nice new features to it. We've adjusted some of our kindergarten ELA curriculum. We were finding letter of the week is old school because they're doing it in preschool. So we've done like a condensed version, which goes with the Foundations program that we're using for phonics. And they do more like 2 or 3 letters a week. So by December, they've hit all the letters. Kids that still don't know their letters and sounds, that's where they'll do their small centers and keep drilling those later in the year. So there's a lot going on. We're still doing some coding. We had a STEM day in October. We'll have another one in March. We're hoping, Mr. Bell and I, to add a STEM teacher. And that would help all the way through the whole district if we could add that in.
That teacher would cover from pre-K all the way to
Pre-K to
all the way
5. Right, and so
It's part of
there
the
again,
rotation.
part of a rotation with the special, the art, the music, and I'm sure you'll be hearing more about our pitch on that one coming up. We are looking at this ST Math, which, thinking of doing a pilot with just a couple of the teachers in the spring. So before we even pilot, I want to get my teachers on the iPad and let them play around with it. There's no language in this program.
Right.
It's all hands-on, try to figure it out, how do I do this? And, even for us at first, when you look at it, it's like, what the heck is this? But the kids get it and they love it. So I'm excited about that. So I want my teachers to see it at this next staff meeting, if I can get them on the iPad, do the demos, and then see if we can get a couple people on board to pilot in the spring. And then we'd really have a good handle on it. So. that's
Thank
it.
you. So I just, thank you all for indulging our questions. I know MCAS, we probably put more attention into it than we probably should, but I think it's probably one of the few real tangible things for us as a school committee to kind of talk about. But, at least from my perspective, I think the length of discussion tonight probably outweighs the importance that I put on MCAS overall relative to our overall performance. I don't know if anyone else, feels that way, but just, I don't want you to take this as, these guys are all about MCAS and nothing else that we're doing here, at least from my perspective, so, thank you.
This is a lovely last slide that we have. The Douglas administrators, teachers, and support staff continue to work diligently every day to increase student performance. We strive for excellence and commit to improving student achievement. And there's an excellent little, what do you call those things, that word scramble?
Word cloud.
Is it a word cloud? Very nice. That Mrs. Soser is very good at putting together a great word cloud. So that's everything. It actually ran a little bit longer than we anticipated, but hopefully it was informative.
It was, thank you.
Quite.
I do have the comparisons, but
Yeah.
we just didn't put them in the slideshow,
Okay.
in the PowerPoint,
Yep.
so.
Yeah, I think we have
Yeah.
all of those, right? Yeah, so,
Yep.
thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Don't go too far, but. All right, so next on there is the parent-teacher conference schedule and early release. I did a one-call yesterday, just a reminder to parents, a couple of things. One is that we didn't want the pre-K, the pre-school PM kids coming to school when there would be no school going on, nor did we want kids coming back to go to enrichment when there is no enrichment. So I wanted to make sure that was done. And the dad in me always worries about Sally not getting nobody at home to pick up Sally because, oops, I forgot to mark the calendar that was an early release day. So that's why I do it. Sometimes they can be intrusive, I know, but I wanted to make sure. But they are this week. So you have the primary school, the elementary school, and the middle school are doing Thursday night and Friday during the day. And the high school is just doing Thursday night. A reminder that it is in fact an early release day. One of the conversations at the meeting today was that there's only so many slots, and we know it's difficult for people to get in. If people are not able to get in or it doesn't work with their schedule, they can certainly call and make arrangements to meet with a teacher or a team of teachers during the day or after school or before school. We will do our best to accommodate as many as possible. And hopefully parents will be able to come in and get some information about their students, and they'll find it beneficial.
I have to speak to this again, because every year, the principals always get my phone call, but every year it's an issue. There's 30 time slots for middle school. It's not right. I don't agree with it.
We did talk about that today.
And we really have to look at another way to do this. It's just, it's not right.
Well, one of the things we did talk about today was maybe looking at the concept of maybe moving away from the team working as one, and maybe the team working as two, so you can double the number of people that you can see. Something that we really need to take a look at. When you do something that's team-based, it's really difficult because technically, if each teacher was seeing, here at the high school, they go door to door, and you have to wait in line sometimes to see a particular teacher. Maybe not at the high school. You never wait at the high school.
There's a couple.
There's a couple, but for the most part, you don't have to wait. But we talked about that today, and we do need to come up with a better model to make it work so that there are more opportunities. That was one of the ideas that Josh brought up to maybe consider for next year, is can we split the teams, and that way you double the amount of parent-teacher conferences you can have, type of thing.
That actual concept was brought up to me by a couple parents in
Yeah.
my neighborhood around just, do I have to meet with all 4 of them? Can I meet with 1 of them, or, 2 of them would be even better, I think,
Right.
so.
I think if we could do 2, that would be beneficial.
It really is something that it's a problem every year, and it's something that's so important, that communication with a parent and a teacher, and then to just get them so aggravated that, geez, I can't even get in. It is a competition. As soon as that letter gets home, oh my God, did you get the letter? Did you get the letter? As soon as they get the letter, it's everybody has to go online, and if you don't get in right away, that's it, you're screwed. And that's the feeling that you get. And it's a horrible feeling.
But parents should also know that they can reach out to the schools.
Yeah, I was just going to
I'm
say.
glad
I
that you
think
said that.
arrangements.
Yes.
We've found the teachers to be very responsive to
Yeah.
just email inquiries about
Right.
things too. So, I do think we should try to expand the number of slots, but I also think parents should do more to
Yep.
utilize other avenues. I think the teachers have been very responsive to those other avenues. So,
So we'll charge Mr.
A bit of both there,
Delaney with
so.
broaching that with your staff.
Committed to increasing it by a minimum of 30%.
thank you.
Whatever.
You're at
works.
30% now, you're rated to 60%, that's something, right?
It's something.
Well, and there have been times in the past that in doing a conference with the team that for whatever reason one teacher isn't able to be there or whatever, and the other team members have picked up and, they get the information and let you know how your kid's doing in that particular subject. So I think the idea of splitting them in half so that more people can get that, while it's not ideal, you're not seeing all the teachers, it's certainly feasible, and they've been great at helping each other out, so.
Very good.
Okay.
All right, so the last thing I had was a safety meeting update, a memorandum of understanding proposal. I brought this to your attention recently when we were talking about the safety plan. One of the things that came out was the conversation around being able to, that prompted this was the high school, for example, being a perfect example. If the bottom of the driveway is obstructed and we need to evacuate the other 3 buildings and we need to get the buses out, we can't get them out. There's no way to get them out. So one of the things that we talked about, and I brought up with the superintendents, the Blackstone Valley Superintendents Consortium, was did anybody have any kind of an agreement? And it turned out that Uxbridge and Northbridge had an agreement. So I did some research. They were open to the concept of entering into a memorandum. I have it here, the work that I've done with it, but I'm not going to share it with you just yet, because if they're not on board, why have you approved something that they're not on board with? So I'm going to bring it to them at the next meeting. But basically, it's talking about if a school district is overwhelmed by a crisis or a disaster or some sort of an emergency, that we can reach out to other districts within the Blackstone Valley Consortium and look for mutual aid to be shared. So if it might be sending guidance counselors, school counselors, sending counselors, or maybe it is sending buses so that we can evacuate our students. We have buses, but we need a place to evacuate to. Can we use your buildings as a reunification location and so forth? So if we can come to an understanding with that, there are some other things with it, again, that obviously once we get to a location, it wouldn't be the receiving district's responsibility to manage our students and our staff. It would be our responsibility. If there was a situation where police and even media were involved, the receiving district wouldn't have any obligation to that. It would all be ours. But the question becomes, can we get everybody entered into an agreement? And heaven forbid we ever need to use it. But at least we have something in place. It would need to be reviewed and revised each year with the consortium, and then it would need to be signed off, actually not every year, biannually. And then we would have that comfort of knowing that, okay, we can't get the buses out, but we can call Uxbridge, and Uxbridge is going to be able to get buses to us. And Courtney's also worked with Telstone to come up with a plan to get buses. Somehow, some way can we get off property? And then one of the things that we talked about with reunification was, we're trying to figure out, okay, can they go into the senior center? Well, how many students can fit in the senior center? Can they go into the River Church? How many can fit in the, so school districts have bigger buildings, have gyms, have auditoriums, have cafeterias, which make it much more palatable for unification, for kids having a place to go to. So I've created it, I've written it, I've drawn it up, and I'm going to bring it to the meeting, which I think is December, whatever the first Friday in December is. And then they'll take it back. We'll go through the process again of readings, and then hopefully have it in place by the January or something along those lines. And that would be added to our emergency planning as well.
Great.
So that's the last thing I had under the superintendent's report.
Okay. Thank you. Next on our agenda is school committee and subcommittee reports. Our accounts payable report.
Okay, on November 7th, 2019, I signed 17 batches totaling $414,241.99. And on November 14th, 2019, 5 batches totaling $25,510.89. And nothing unusual.
Any questions on that? If not, we'll move on to our consent agenda. First up is our November 6th meeting minutes. I did not see anything of note in the meeting minutes. Anyone else?
So I had one thing.
Sure. Which page?
On
Second
page
page?
3,
Three?
other topics,
Yep.
second paragraph, sentence 2, says that I suggested that there be a way to immediately notify families of all the details, for instance, that the 911 call was due to a power outage. I didn't go back and watch the tape, so I can't confirm 100% that I didn't say that, but what I was saying was that I saw families hearing the 911 call and feeling panicked. So I wanted to stress that I think it would be good for the district to have that sort of like, in the event of an emergency, we will notify you as soon as possible. Please do not come to the school, whatever you deem appropriate for the parents' responsibility. But I do think that the parents' responsibilities need to be laid out. So I don't know.
Cross out the word all.
All. And immediately, I don't
Yeah, but I don't
expect
think
you to
immediately.
immediately.
I think the whole,
Yeah.
I don't remember that being the gist of that
That
conversation.
wasn't what I was saying.
that was
And I
definitely
wouldn't
not.
want,
Yeah.
I don't
Strike
expect
that entire
that.
sentence?
Because I think you specifically talked about the fact that, nobody expects that you can get a call immediately
Right.
with everything because you're too busy dealing
Responding
with
to
the
the-
Right.
situation.
But I
Responding to the
was
situation.
literally around parents who were like, 10 minutes in, should we go to the school?
Yeah.
20 minutes in, should we go now? Should we pack car seat? Like, it's happening because there is immediate access to partial information. So, yeah.
True.
If we could just strike that sentence.
Yeah, I'm okay striking that sentence. Anyone having objections
And
to that?
we'll work on that a little bit. and
I
see if
think
we
the
come up with a
gist
better plan.
of that conversation gets to the next paragraph, where it says, Ms. Grady suggested posting on the website that all emergency information will be available by.
Right.
I think we showed this a couple of times where, you can't be addressing all your parents while you're trying to address
Yeah.
whatever the emergency situation is. But
Right.
if there's a general statement on our website to say, in the case of,
Yeah.
Right.
we always
and
get
then
the
next sentence
notification
that
at
you
the-
made it clear that the situation needs to be addressed before a one call can go
Yeah.
out.
Right.
Yeah, so I think
that
that
the priority
paragraph
is the
gets to what, the
situation.
point you were making, Becky, so I think
Yeah.
we've got by striking that sentence, we still got the gist of the conversation covered in the minutes, so. I'm okay striking that, so it's the second
In case I ever run for
sentence in
reelection.
the second paragraph under other topics.
We could, and we can talk about that at an admin meeting to see if there's a protocol where somebody can be siphoned off and make that phone call type of thing, but I
Yeah,
can tell you.
I
Because
think
your point was well taken.
Right,
Your
all-
point was
Yeah,
well
it
taken.
wasn't
All
the
hands were
speed
on
of
board,
it.
and that was the
Yeah.
problem.
Right.
We were moving, 300-400
Yeah,
students.
unfortunately, social media moves much quicker than
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
situations will allow for.
I think even at the beginning of each school year, like we, at least primary, elementary school parents get that note from Officer Brett that's like, do not drive quickly down the
Right,
road, do
right,
not,
right.
and it's a nice reminder that okay, people are getting out at different times for for kindergarten versus preschool, and I don't think there's any harm in
No?
a type of notification where parents can put it in the back of their heads, okay, this is the procedure in case of an emergency.
Yeah, no, that was a good point.
Any other changes, amendments to these minutes? Okay. Now I'll be looking for a motion to approve the school committee meeting minutes for November 6, 2019 as amended.
So moved.
Motion from Kelly,
Second.
second from Lisa. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or abstained? Seeing none. Okay.
Mr. Romano, back to back?
Yes.
All right, so guidance, or school counseling department is first?
Yes.
Okay, so my grandfather was a guidance counselor in the 1950s, and his job involved giving 1950s career advice to female students, which was to not have a career. Since then, the job has changed significantly, and there is a movement now to change the title from guidance counselor to school counselor. The DESC changed the license title from guidance counselor to school counselor in 2017. So we would like to change the name of the guidance department at Douglas High School to the school counseling department in order to reflect the evolution of the duties and the role. Along with that, change the job titles for the high school guidance counselors to school counselor and the department chair position to school counseling department chair.
Any concerns from the teachers on this, or the
It came
the
from
school
guidance.
counselors?
The school
Okay.
counselors were the
Yeah.
ones who proposed
Okay.
it. So, yeah, they were in favor of this.
Seems pretty straightforward.
I like to throw a softball now and then.
Yeah, but little softball. All right.
Just have to get used to it.
Yeah.
So if no one has any questions remaining,
Read it.
yeah, I would love that.
I move to approve changing the name of the DHS Guidance Department to the DHS School Counseling Department, and the job titles from Guidance Counselor to School Counselor, and Guidance Department Chair to School Counseling Department Chair.
Excellent. We have a motion from Kelly,
Second.
second from Lisa.
No financial impact?
No financial impact to this change.
I struggle to come up with one because Courtney always tells me there's always something. I really
Like,
did
you know,
try.
does the new
I know, we'll
title
have to
come with
reprint
additional,
plan-
you know?
We'll have
Well,
to reprint
Do we have a
pamphlets, so
sign that has to be
Reprinting.
replaced
Oh, yeah,
if
yeah,
there's
there you
guidance
go.
department?
Yes,
I
there you
know,
go.
so-
See, we knew there was something.
we'd come up with something.
Something
Sooner or
maybe
later, we will.
We'll figure it out.
Gold embossed.
All right. No, we didn't. No, so we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstained? Seeing none.
Thank you very much.
And again, Mr. Romano.
All right, so promotion. So I came to you a couple of weeks ago
Yes.
with promotion requirements for our students. I took your feedback. I went back. I met with my school council, which is parents, teachers, students, and the department chairs. There were a couple. The first one was an easy one. I had said that would be for starting with this year's freshmen. You folks, and I do agree with it. It's maybe fairer to make it next year's freshmen. So we'll start with the class of 2024 instead, which sounds so far in the future. The other piece that we were kind of debating on was whether to put specific requirements for courses with promotion to junior and senior. As in, should we say that in order to be a junior, you have to have 3 courses completed in history, 3 in math, 3 in. And we kind of went back and forth on that. And school council actually came up with sort of a compromise in between, making adequate progress to graduate. So the student who has failed world history 3 times is probably not making adequate progress to graduate. And so this was the version that school council and the department chairs liked the best. They did keep the, that a student has to earn 5 credits in math and 5 credits in English to move on to sophomore. The credit numbers stayed the same. I think we pretty much, the actual number of credits people were pretty satisfied with. So this is the policy that we are seeking to include in our program of studies and our student handbook going forward.
No? No, okay, that's how.
I'm just like getting confused with school council and school counselor.
Oh, I've got a lot of different, yeah. Wait till I start talking about school advisory council too. So.
I would just say that I think this is a good start and no objection to it. I'd be interested to see how the promotion, to junior goes with be making adequate progress and whether you end up getting some situations that you have some challenges to that. And
Right,
but
if it's too vague, but
yeah,
yeah.
I think you might find in 5 years need to change.
We can
that, but-
amend it next year if we
Yeah,
need to, so.
give it a shot for now.
It gives
so.
us something.
Yeah. Any other discussion, questions on this? Okay, you looking for a motion?
So wait, can we have one more discussion? So
Sure,
adequate,
sure.
so let's say, because I know this kind of situation here, let's say that person fails again or something, like, is that grounds to say, I'm sorry, you can't graduate? Like, is that gonna
If
give
it's
us
a
any
requ-
kind of leverage?
If it's a required course, then it would be grounds to say that you can't. So the graduation requirements would say this, are still, they're already in effect, and so in terms of like a senior, if they fail that world history class that they're taking for the 4th time, if they fail
Then
it
they would
again, then
have that
they would not be able to walk at graduation.
Only because it's a graduation requirement.
Right. So if we're looking at, say, the student who they're a junior and they've taken world history for the 3rd time and they failed it, we would be able to say to them, well, you won't have senior privileges. You are not considered a senior. They also at that point, well, no, I guess hold on. They would have failed it 3 times. So they would actually not have enough credits probably to graduate without taking summer
They
school.
don't have enough credits, nor would they have enough time to make up the courses.
Right. They
Remember,
wouldn't
it's
be able
about
to-
promotion though, so would
Yeah.
that would not allow them to go to a senior.
They would have to
Unless they
make
do
up the
summer
course
class.
through summer school. Yeah.
So, that was
Which
my
was the
next question.
primary purpose for this, was to
Right, right.
encourage students to take summer school and not fall into that. I
Make
need
it all up.
Right.
I need 2 extra courses and double gym and to pass to graduate. So
So this hasn't changed the ability of you as the building principal to allow a student to take a second, for example, sequentially, you're supposed to take English 3, then English 4. There have been instances where a student has not been able to pass English 3 and is now a senior and they've taken English 3 and 4 because they
the
didn't
same time,
qualify
yeah.
for summer school.
yep.
Or they can do, which we've also done, so you still have the ability to do this, which is a virtual class that they can make it up in the summertime if they want to, or they can do an American school or something along those lines, so they can get caught back up. But there will be those instances where, one student in a 5-year period of time all of a sudden shows up and needs to take consecutive courses at the same time, which we don't like to do, we don't want to do, but we have made the accommodation. So those things still exist. They're not impacted by your promotion policy. You still have the authority to make decisions, who goes to summer school. Even if they don't qualify for summer school, you can sign off and allow them to take
Yeah,
summer school.
that's true too. So, and it really is there to push kids to take and complete summer school so that they can stay, we can keep them on track and not let it pile up and come as a surprise at senior year.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, in that case, I'll be looking for a motion.
I move to approve the adoption of Douglas High School promotion requirements, starting with the class of 2024.
Okay, we have a motion from Kelly,
Second.
second from Lisa. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstained? Seeing none.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Romano.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Josh.
Mr. Mange, you'll take this one?
Yeah, I'm going to pinch hit for Mrs. Urquhart tonight. So she has brought forward a request for a 1.0 FTE, one-to-one special education paraprofessional. The position is located in the kindergarten. There is a student who is in the building that has, excuse me, sorry, significant trauma history. Over the first, they've done the data analysis, they've done the review, they've done all of the data collection that they need, and she feels that due to safety concerns, the student requires some staffing, requires staffing at all times throughout the school day in order to maintain compliance and safety. The district administered special education testing, as I mentioned, and it was determined that in order to provide a safe, structured, consistent plan, that they would need a one-to-one paraprofessional throughout the school day. And it would obviously be, the position would be a one-to-one kindergarten paraprofessional, and it would be prorated based on the number of days that have already we've already experienced for the school year.
Any questions, comments? Just to note that, it's not a huge financial impact to us this year, but this is a position that we'd be adding that I would anticipate would be included in next year's budget as well, so just keep that in mind.
Not necessarily so, however, because we have been doing some conversations. One of the conversations around today in admin is to look at, and really do a careful look at the needs for a lot of one-to-ones. Can they be more one-to-twos, one-to-threes type of things? Because as was discussed today, these are not positions that should stay with the child necessarily for the next 13 years. The hope is that through the process of support and interventions, that the need for that wanes or is eliminated, and you don't need to have the paraprofessionals with them. And that's something that we've been talking about for years now, and we have made some inroads in trying to address that a little bit more effectively. So
That's great. No, I'm glad to hear that's taking place, but just want the group to be prepared that, this, especially given that's a kindergarten,
Right.
could very well carry over into next year.
right, we would
so.
never compromise
Yeah.
anyone's
So-
ability to meet with success just for the sake. It's not based on a financial need, but it is
Right.
does have a financial implication.
Right. So, okay. Anyone else? Okay. If not, I'll be looking for a motion.
I move to approve a 1.0 FTE 1.0 special education paraprofessional for the primary school for an estimated cost of $14,100 in FY 2020 to be paid from the circuit breaker revolving fund account.
Okay, we have a motion from Lisa.
Second.
And a second from Kelly. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstained? Seeing none. Okay.
We'll get that posted and hopefully filled as soon as possible.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Moving on to our school business and operation managers report.
Okay, guess I'll begin by saying I have sent out to, well, all but one administrator, because I'm still working on her forms, all of the budget forms for preparation of the FY21 budget, and they'll be due back to me by December 20th, and in the meantime, I'll be working on the rest of the budget, which is mostly salaries and things of that nature, and pull it all together after that. When we meet on Monday for our budget subcommittee, we'll go over the calendar, kind of look at some time frame, get an idea of the calendar, just give you a little bit of an update there. There was something else I was going to say about the budget. Darn, went right out of my head. Yes, oh, actually, there are some DESE chart of account changes as well that I'm going to have to incorporate again. They've been doing a lot of changes each year. In addition to that, the finance director has been making some changes too with regard to object codes, so that's a good segue into my transfers and reclassifications. So on the FY20 budgetary transfers, request number 2, about half of them are just that. The finance director set up a new object code 53406 for subscriptions, which, as you can imagine, are all throughout our budget. Could be software subscriptions, could be magazine subscriptions, could be a million different things, unfortunately. So we're moving money around for that, and the rest of them are just from administrators,
Okay.
basically. So nothing really big there. Does anyone have any questions on the transfers?
Okay. Yeah, let's just take a motion on this one. So looking to approve the FY 2020 budgetary transfer request number 2 for school committee meeting November 20th, 2019.
So moved.
Okay, motion from Becky,
Second?
a second from Lisa. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstained? Seeing none.
Okay, thank you. And I also have FY 2020 reclassifications number 2. And this is basically was an error of putting it in the general fund rather than breaking it between the circuit breaker and the 240 grant, this particular invoice.
Okay.
We have ones that go into the general fund, and then we have ones that we have to choose to go into to take up the entire 240 grant, and then also what we had budgeted for circuit breaker.
Gotcha.
So it's just making that correction.
Okay. Any questions? Okay, if not, we're looking for a motion to approve FY 2020 reclassification number 2 for school committee meeting November 20th, 2019.
So moved.
A motion from Kelly,
Second.
second from Lisa. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstained? Seeing none.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Under topics not anticipated, I'll just add that the House and Senate today of Massachusetts passed the Student Opportunity Act. I don't know if it's Mr. Maines or Mrs. Keegan supplied us with lots of
No, there was
documentation
something else, yeah.
on this for your reading pleasure. I just want to say this passing this act is a huge win for Massachusetts. It's not necessarily going to mean a whole lot for Douglas.
But there are some good things
There
that
are some
I did
things, yeah,
note.
I think, yeah.
You know, and I apologize that the copies I gave you did have my notes. I have a very bad habit of writing all over things. I didn't want to
Okay.
print out a whole other blank. But anyway, just a couple of key points. The Chapter 70 will be implemented over 7 years. So in the question and answer, they didn't make that little notation there, and I think that's very key, and that's why I wrote that in there.
Yep.
But, again, this is always subject to, appropriation over the time, always. But there are some excellent things here that we have not seen for many, many years, and I think that it is a wonderful thing that they have gotten to this point.
Yeah.
They are addressing the special education students, they're addressing, and also transportation is in there, special ed transportation, which is huge. Health insurance, now how the health insurance will impact us, as you know, in our general fund budget. Regionals are different. But for municipal school districts, it's the town side that pays for the health insurance. But that being said, what it will do is, within the foundation budget on the school side, that's prepared by and calculated by DESC, that's the figure that, in effect, determines Chapter 70 funding and the minimum required contribution, which those two added together come to that foundation budget. So it'll be, probably a mix and match of the Chapter 70 and/or the minimum required contribution required by the town.
Yeah, so I think, yeah.
Okay, so I think that's a
So I think
key,
there will be some benefits for our
there are
district
definitely
with some of the
some
changes.
issues.
I think there could be some impacts on the town side to that point you just made, that around the minimum contribution that the town will be required to make. So just, it's a bit of a mixed bag overall for the town. I think it's overall good for our district. Not as good as it is for many other districts, I think. I think a lot of the funding focus here
Again,
addresses issues in the state that we don't necessarily have.
we always fall through the cracks.
A
Yeah.
bit, but I think it
But
goes to
still.
the point of we had Senator Fatman and Representative McKenna down here a couple weeks with our big fake check for the Chromebooks, and we have those Chromebooks now. I think they realize that this bill doesn't do a whole lot for, I think, many of the schools in their districts. So I think addressing some of our funding shortfalls through the items like getting Chromebooks or other technologies needs, I think they're going to be more than willing to help us along those lines, knowing that we're not necessarily helped as much through this bill as maybe a lot of other districts are. So we just got to continue to pursue that avenue, I think, vigorously. Okay. I think that's it. Anything else for anyone? We'll need an executive session this evening with just the school committee and Mr. Maines. So I'll be looking for a motion. We will only come out of executive session for the purpose of adjourning our open session. You're looking for a motion to enter into executive session.
I move to enter into executive session.
Okay, motion from Becky,
Second.
second from Kelly. And get a roll call vote.
Becky Charniak, aye.
Julie Mulder, aye.
Brett Argel, aye.
Kelly Grady, aye.
Lisa Brown, aye.
We are in executive session. Thank you, everyone.